Good afternoon, everyone, for a special immediately post-crossover edition of the Land Use and Ethics Subcommittee. For today's meeting, we have just one bill on the agenda. It's House Bill 538. This is the governor's, for lack of a better term, zoning bill called the Housing Expansion and Affordability Act of 2024. We took this up a week or so ago. It's sort of a very, very brief and initial stage. And now we have a reprint that I'm going to ask my staff to pull up. And we're going to start with just sort of walking through that, taking questions as we go. I think other than this, there is at least one additional amendment I think we'll be talking through after we walk through this. That's sort of minor and I think easy to understand. So I tried to get around to everyone and talk about this bill as much as I could individually. I also tried to hand out a physical copy of this reprint this morning. I first just want to thank Ben for all of his hard work on putting this together. It was not an easy process, but we've been working with a number of different stakeholders. We went through basically every proposed amendment from every group. We've been in constant communication with the governor's team as well as DHCD and the speaker's office. So this is not necessarily the finished product, but this is the reprint that we're going to walk through today and see how everyone's feeling about this bill. Okay. Anyone have any questions before we kick it off? Okay, we can start scrolling down here. Purpose paragraph. As you can see, we got 13 pages to go through here. We can keep going. Okay, so this is adding this historic property revitalization director. Basically their duty here, as you can see, is that they're supporting the work of the Smart Growth Subcabinet, which we actually renamed in a different bill. I think the Sustainable Growth Subcabinet. You can keep going. These are sort of the duties of this this office of historic property revitalization. The director shall get a salary, etc. Delegate Foley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this historic property revitalization director, will this person have more duties beyond, have duties beyond the four corners of this bill, or is it just for the purposes of this bill?
It's sort of an add-on provision, Delegate Foley. So this is really a kind of a larger position that's not just engaged in implementing the bill, but it's sort of like a separate position focused on historic revitalization, which honestly, the rest of the bill only focuses on sort of tangentially.
Right, that's what I thought. And so this is actually a new position just for this historic to put, to prioritize buildings that are on the National Register for Historic Places. That's what this job does, right? But it's doing it outside of just this bill. This is a new position that goes beyond this bill. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, we'll keep rolling then. Okay, we're now on page 3 of the reprint for anyone that's following along. Page 4. Okay, so this is the first sort of first part here that is sort of substantive and that we've talked through a little bit before, and this is the manufactured home piece of the bill. So you can see here that what we did is basically add specifically a definition of modular dwellings to this section on manufactured homes. This was from, I forget the exact entity that suggested this, but this was just born out of concern that possibly the definition of manufactured homes was not broad enough to encompass modular homes. And because we want modular homes to be in the bill. Now, if you remember from our discussion before, manufactured homes under the sort of existing statutory definition have to be affixed to the foundation. So they can't be sort of a free-floating mobile home that you sort of drive around, whether you're talking manufactured homes or modular homes, for it to be given this treatment in the bill to essentially given this priority status of not being able to be denied by a local jurisdiction. It has to be either a manufactured home or a modular home. Brad, I don't know if that was intentional or not, but yeah, if anyone from the governor's office or DHCD want to correct any of that, or if I've already messed up, my apology. Okay. Seeing no corrections, we'll move right along. This is really a technical amendment. This is just, like I said, we're just adding modular to make sure everyone knows that we're adding modular. Delegate Foley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry again. I just want to, I'm back on this idea of modular.
Yep.
Not sure I understand what a modular dwelling is.
Yep. Well, in general, what it means is that you're building a house off-site, and then it is being delivered to an address affixed to the foundation. And otherwise, generally, these homes kind of look exactly like normal stick-built housing, except it's just cheaper to build off-site versus on-site. So that's what a modular home is. Delegate Holmes?
Yes, and I just wanted to expand upon that, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
There are some modular homes that if you went past them, you would have no idea that they were manufactured off-site and brought in. And if you went inside of them, you still would have no idea that they were modular homes. Quite frankly, modular homes have more structural integrity than a normal stick-built house does, because they're brought off-site, they're bolted together in sections, and you can't tell the difference either by the exterior or the interior of the homes. I just want to expand upon that, Mr. Chair.
No, I appreciate that. I appreciate that addition, Mr. Chairman. That's exactly right. And in fact, if you guys have a second and want to multitask a little bit, you can just Google image search modular homes to see a little bit about what Delegate Holmes is talking about here. They really are completely indistinguishable from stick-built housing, but represent maybe a more affordable and sort of an option that is growing in popularity that we're trying to account for in the future. Delegate Siliberti. You're on mute.
Hang on. Okay. I've seen these things built, and as Delegate Holmes pointed out, they come in sections. You'll have a whole wall that's coming in, and they bolt them down to the concrete floor, and obviously bolt them in. But they're very secure, and in many cases, as Delegate Holmes has said, they're better constructed than stick built. Yep, no question about it.
Great. Awesome. Well, I'm glad we have that bipartisan support for modular housing. As you guys can see on the bottom of page 4 of the reprint, so lines, basically like old lines 3 and 4 there. Yeah, that sentence right there is essentially what this section is doing in a nutshell, where it says a legislative body may not prohibit the placement of a new manufactured home or modular dwelling, that's the amendment, in a zone that allows single-family residential uses if the home or dwelling meets the definition of either a modular dwelling or a manufactured home under the bill. So that's what we're trying to do. We're basically trying to pave way in the future for a scenario where these types of homes can flourish and thrive without sort of undue burdens placed on them by local jurisdictions who maybe have not necessarily Google image search this or listen to Delegate Siliberti and Delegate Holmes about the merits of this type of off-site construction. Okay, we'll keep rolling. Delegate Siliberti, I assume that's an old hand, but you may want to load. Yeah, there we go. Okay, great. We'll keep rolling. So now we're out of the manufactured home section, and we're into what I would consider probably the core of the bill here in section 7501 on page 5 of your reprint. This is the definition section. This is mostly unaltered from the original version of the bill. One thing we did do, you'll see on page 6 of the reprint, in lines 5 and 6, is we just cleaned up. We got some feedback about the definition of mixed. You can keep going. You keep scrolling down. Yeah. Mixed use right here. Yeah. So this is one of the amendments we made, just a technical amendment. We wanted to make sure that what mixed use was in the bill was residential mixed with something that's not residential. The way the definition came in was a combination of housing. We would open up the definition of mixed use to include, for example, like retail and office, but no housing. We wanted to make it clear that we're talking about housing plus something else. So that's that change there. Delegate Naraki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have some concerns with that change there. So I have an area in my district that has some potential mixed use nodes in our county's master plan that is in a heavy industrial area. So with the way that changes there, I mean, that could mean that, you know, people could be living over like a steel mill, essentially.
Well, I mean, I don't think that housing would be approved in industrial areas, regardless. What we're not saying in this bill that like mixed use is always going to be okay. And if you have residential with something else, then local jurisdictions just have to eat that. We're just saying you'll see later where this mixed income or this mixed use definition comes up, but we're not sort of forcing local jurisdictions to essentially like put housing next to like heavy industry.
No, and I appreciate that, Mr. Chair, but I'm telling you, in Baltimore County, in our comprehensive master plan that we just passed, we have these nodes in my district that are in industrial areas, and I've raised the same concern with the county that I'm not sure that that's appropriate to put folks in those kinds of areas. So I just want to throw that out there for consideration because some weird permutations could occur with the wording like that there.
Okay, got it. Yeah, I mean, I think I see. Basically, you're saying that it's tighter to say housing, retail, and office space because industry is not included. Whereas if you go residential versus non-residential, you open up sort of things that aren't housing, retail, or office space that we don't necessarily want to put next to housing.
Yes, it could. You open it up to anything theoretically there. It could be the landfill that's in my district that could be opened up there. I'm just throwing that out there for consideration.
Okay. I hear that. Delegate Lehman.
Yeah. Thank you. And I'm actually going to back up Delegate Narwaki on this as a former council member. That is too wide open. That would be to just talk about a non-residential use could result in some really unfortunate situations. I think, take the standard look at, any number of counties and see how mixed use is described. It's usually residential with commercial. It's usually pretty straightforward. And there are different levels of commercial. There's, office and there's retail, but that's what is normally meant by mixed use. I think it would be a mistake to change that definition.
Got it. Okay. I totally hear what you guys are saying. We may be able to sort of do a conceptual amendment here on that issue. I do want to open it up to our friends at either DHCD or Mr. Fallon to see if they have any thoughts either on anything I've said so far that's incorrect, or if they want to comment on this mixed use definition. Yeah, go ahead, Brad.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You can actually throw it over to Haley Lemieux from the Department of Housing, who's texted me during this with some information that just might be helpful. Haley, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just want to reiterate to the committee that this change is relative to the existing zoning code. So it's only if the existing zoning code allows an existing residential use. So if the county is allowing residential use next to a landfill or a steel mill, then this bill would apply because it has the overlay component. However, expanding the definition of mixed use in this way is feedback that we got from our local partners just to make sure that it's unnecessarily restrictive. So for example, the existing definition could have excluded residential combined with restaurant uses or other commercial uses that weren't included in the original definition.
Got it. Okay, that's helpful, Haley. Thanks. It looks like maybe we have some questions possibly for Haley. Delegate Foley.
Yeah. So hearing all of this, I do think that this definition is a problem based on what's been said. But perhaps it could be this definition, or there could be a default to whatever the local definition is of mixed use. Whatever the local planning entity has used to define mixed use. Because I do think, I am concerned about the definition here, echoing what my colleagues have said.
Okay, great. Appreciate that. Delegate Naraki.
Yeah, I mean, if restaurants are a concern, Mr. Chair, then I think we could just write restaurants in there. I mean, I think that would tighten that up quite a bit there. I'm really concerned with this definition with some of the sites that I have in my district that frankly are in Baltimore County's master plan that I've raised these exact same concerns about.
Got it. Okay, well then what I'm going to ask Ben to do, and this, if we end up voting today, this we may make a little bit of a liberal use of conceptual amendments. Obviously, if it gets out of hand and unwieldy, then we won't. But Ben, I think it would be not a heavy lift to just do a conceptual amendment to clean this up and just basically say a combination of residential use with retail, office, or dining. Okay, Ben's giving me a thumbs up. Everyone else, thumbs up or thumbs down on that conceptual. We'll obviously, be able to take a look at it in full committee, but I think that addresses the concerns. Okay, let's keep rolling then. This is again on page 6. One change you can see here, if you go down the definition of townhouse, is that we tighten this up a little bit and we defined a townhouse as 3 or more attached units rather than 2. I think that this change was just motivated by people's general understanding of townhouses, and if you just have 2 that are connected, then probably that doesn't really count as a townhouse. So that was the motivation for that. And then if you also look, one section we got a lot of feedback on is this one right here, this unreasonable limitation or requirement. We'll get to the importance of this phrase later. We talked about it a little bit last time, but basically an unreasonable limitation or requirement includes a limitation or requirement that has a substantial adverse impact on, and then there's a list of 3 things. You can see that we added the number of units of the qualified project to the allowable density piece. And basically what we're trying to get at here is, if we're going to be passing this bill, we don't want counties or local jurisdictions to sort of subvert the intent of what we're doing by strategically layering on lots of new rules. And so that's where this unreasonableness standard comes up. But also we didn't want to just sort of say, oh, anything that's unreasonable is out. We wanted to provide as much sort of detail as possible in this definition so that local jurisdictions would have enough of a heads up about what's unreasonable and what's reasonable. But we'll get into that more in the relevant section. We're still in the definitions. Okay, we can keep rolling. We're going to head over to page 7. This is a really important section here. And it includes what I would probably consider the most significant change in this reprint from the original bill. So if you guys remember, the first part of the bill is about manufactured housing, and now with the amendment, modular housing. The second part of the bill is defining a qualified project as 3 different types of projects, and then awarding those projects with both density bonuses and an expedited development process. So here, you can see that we included this new language here on lines 3 and 4 about new construction or substantial renovations. And basically DHCD already has this program guide where they essentially list out what the substantial renovations and the new constructions are. So that's just a kind of like a technical amendment to give a little bit of detail about what we mean there. But the big amendment we had here is on line 12 and on line 14. And then we'll continue to go down as well. But this one, this is the first type of a qualified project. This is what I was calling the state-owned campus qualified project, but this is basically property that was formerly owned by the state. And it came in as basically saying that it was a qualified project if it had 50% affordability levels. And you'll see here, and this is going to be a trend throughout the bill, that the reprint now says 25. We have this affordability requirement based on feedback from a lot of stakeholders. And mostly what we're thinking here is we're willing to avoid the concentration of poverty in any of these areas, including these formerly state-owned campuses. And there were concerns from all corners really about the 50% affordability threshold that came in. And there was an interest in lowering those from a number of different people, especially when it comes to these types of campuses. There's just really not that much of them. So to have a 50% affordability target, which is pretty ambitious on land, we really don't have a whole lot of this that's applicable anyway, was kind of shooting for a unicorn sort of project. And we think that this provision of the bill will have a little bit more weight and will actually do something if we half this affordability requirement down here to 25%. Any questions on that so far? Delegate Davis.
So the bill started off at 50%. I understand concentrations of poverty, but how did we end up with 25?
Yeah, I mean, so this is really more of, I would say, an art than a science in terms of what the exact threshold is. But what we heard from a variety of stakeholders, including people that testified at the hearing, was that 25% was a more realistic number that projects could hit, and that it was going to be difficult to find any projects that would meet this 50% definition. So, you know, I think, you know, whether it's 25 or 27 or 31 or whatever is a little bit more of a, you know, an art than a science. So I can't really exactly say why it's that threshold specifically. Delegate Lehman, you're on mute.
Yeah, thank you. I wondered too about dropping it all the way down to 25, but I get your point that somewhere between 25 and 30 or ish is somewhat subjective. But then I'm seeing this. So I have one other question, but because I'm looking down to the second in paragraph 4, the second change from 50 to 25%. What's below that, B1, caught my eye, saying a local jurisdiction shall allow the density. Hold on, shall allow the density of a qualified project to exceed the density with the subject of local in accordance of local jurisdiction. Is that supposed to say shall or may? Isn't that supposed to say may?
No, I think that's a shall. That's the density bonus section of this. So basically, we're requiring jurisdictions to allow a density bonus for all 3 types of qualified projects, including this one.
Okay. All right. And so I didn't even mean to get down that far. I wanted to go back actually and ask about, and I guess this was existing language, but maybe I didn't notice it before. Can we go back up a little further? Keep going. The condition that one building that was built more than 50 years before the date of application, what is that about? What?
That's just trying to get at this issue that these are basically neglected former state-owned campus properties. And so that year thing is in there because basically we don't want these to be, you know, areas that were recently redeveloped. Like the governor's team has in mind specifically, I think a few sites across the state.
Okay.
Where they've essentially, you're talking about like developments that were maybe once thriving, or they were campuses, they were either work campuses or school campuses, and they've kind of been left to decay.
Yeah.
And so the idea behind this type of qualified project is hopefully to try to find people to help redevelop these areas that are otherwise kind of unsafe. You know, they're just kind of like these old buildings that are not really up to code, and they're probably not really safe to walk through, and they probably have asbestos, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay. Yeah. I think some of our former state hospitals, like tuberculosis and mental hospitals.
Exactly.
Okay. Thank you. That makes sense. Thanks. That's it.
Yeah. And I'll pause there too, just to give Brad or Haley an opportunity to correct me if any of what I said was incorrect there.
No, that's all absolutely right. And thank you, Mr. Chair, for throwing to us. There are 12 sites that we've identified. There is a component in there that allows a secretary to identify these sites, but because the state owns and then gets rid of quite a bit of property, we wanted to make sure that we were tightening this list down to places like what you brought up, Delegate Lehman, the old hospitals, things that are really just blight at this point and are in need of redevelopment.
And did you guys have any additional thoughts on this 50 to 25% pare down that Delegate Davis raised?
Yeah, absolutely. Frankly, I think you did a great job at explaining it or going into this point. We had kind of put these numbers up at 50 to kind of start the conversation after working with a bunch of local partners, with partners in the development space and kind of everybody in between. It was determined that closer to 25 to 20% is more in line with what you see for other financing programs that come up. And it's just frankly at 60% AMI, this is really affordable, right? And it's hard to recoup your investments. And so if you set the affordability rate too high, one, you get concerns about concentration of poverty, but two, it just doesn't pencil out. And so lowering that level makes sure that we get something done here without fundamentally changing the communities.
Yeah, I mean, in other words, affordability goals are great, and I would personally love to see as much affordability as possible. But the choice you're left with is, do you shoot for the stars with the best of intentions, and then actually no projects end up being developed at all because you shot so high? Or do you try to be more realistic with the affordability requirements, knowing what developers can actually do and have actually done and what's happening on the ground so that you actually do get some units, including some affordable units, that may not have existed if you shot too high. So that's kind of just to basically restate what Brad just said, that's kind of what we're trying to go for, is find that Goldilocks approach where we're getting affordable housing, but we're not in the idea or in the vein of sort of trying to be maximally affordable, that we're actually sort of overshooting our target and end up with no new housing at all. Delegate Foley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have two questions about this section. One is following up on Delegate Lehman's question about the building that was built more than 50 years before the date of the application. Now, as I understand it, these conditions for these properties are not but it must be all inclusive. It must be all of these, right? So,
correct. That's an and, yeah.
Yeah. So, so the building, is it contemplated that the building would remain, or could the building be demolished? I mean, what is the role of that building there?
Yeah, I think that the idea was that it was still a campus that actually still had buildings there in the hopes they could be redeveloped as part of the project. Sometimes you have historical buildings and it would be nice to sort of be able to revamp them and keep the history of the site. But I don't think that we're requiring that, we're defining the scope of these 12 sites by using the building. But what we're not doing is being prescriptive in this bill about what the redevelopment would look like, whether the building would have to be repurposed, whether it would have to be leveled. I think we would leave that open to the developer, because again, the goal here is not to be so prescriptive that we don't get anyone taking us up on this. And we're not in a situation where we pass the bill and 5 years later, all 12 of these campuses just remain the exact same as they did in 2024.
I am a little concerned that maybe with that in there, it feels like you kind of have to use the building.
No, I don't think so.
Okay, well,
yeah.
Maybe I'm right, because I think there are could be problems with that. That was my first question. And my second question goes to the 25%. Number 4, it says deed restricted to include 25% of units that are affordable dwelling units for a period of at least 40 years.
Right.
So does that mean it's going to lock into 25% affordable for 40 years?
That's right.
So that's the best that could happen here. The best that could happen here in terms of
that's the worst that could happen. The worst that could happen is 40 years.
That's my question. So that means that if, for example, as the housing aged, let's say it got to be more affordable, and the more, the percentage got higher. Let's say it did approach, it got to 30 or 40 or 50% as it got older. So that 40 years is not a cap, it's a floor.
Right. It says at least, that's exactly right. It says at least 40 years. The idea here is that after about 40 years of affordability, that at least gets us the minimum of 25% that remain affordable locked in for 40 years. Under federal LIHTC programs, the affordability length is actually only 15 years long. So this is more than double that period of affordability. And what we're shooting for here is exactly what you said, which is a certain age, properties become what they call naturally occurring affordable housing. So we're thinking that we'll at least have that 25% for 40 years. And then after the 40 years is over, these properties may be kind of vintage enough, if you will, that it may be more like 60%, or maybe by that point, it's naturally occurring affordable housing and 100% are affordable for people making 60 or 80% of AMI.
Okay, thanks.
But yeah, to your first point about having to this implying that maybe they have to use the building and that being somewhat problematic and overly prescriptive, I'm happy to kick it to someone smarter than me, Ben, Brad, or Haley, about on that issue, just to make sure I'm not crazy, that we're not necessarily requiring them to use the building. We're just trying to define what the sites are, and we want to make clear that this is a campus that actually had a structure on it rather than just like some sort of field.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Mr. Chair and Delegate Foley. We would, I have no problem if you guys want to change it from 50 to something else, but it's not required to use the building.
Okay, great. Delegate Foley, are you good for now? Okay. Delegate Long.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And again, my question was also following up with what Delegate Davis said, but I wanted to add some additional questions to it very briefly. I am curious to, again, what led to, we know the answer to that now, but the 25%, and wondering if Brad could say where those 12 sites are located. And then just also for the purpose of discussion, would it make more sense to have that number elevated in more densely populated areas where there's those concerns that local jurisdictions that are smaller may have as well, if that makes sense. So where the 12 sites, and then could that number maybe be elevated in jurisdictions where are there more densely populated areas?
Sure, happy to kick that over to Brad or the DHCD team to take, either more discussion about what the kind of Goldilocks percentage is, whether it makes sense to break that out with different parts of the state. And yeah, I would also love to know what the 12 sites are.
Yeah, so all of you have received a spreadsheet and a map that shows all 12 sites. I will bump that again right here when I get off mic, just to send to everybody. But they are kind of all around the state. I'm happy to run down the list if that's helpful. But, there's one in Prince George's, there's one in Anne Arundel County, there's 12 statewide, though. So just let me know if that's helpful. Delegate Long, to the second point, before I dig into that,
Chair, sorry, I couldn't hear one thing Brad said. Maybe it's the faulty Wi-Fi in this building.
Okay, yeah. We're not necessarily known here in the House of Delegates office building for our Wi-Fi. So
yes.
What can you hear me now, Delegate Long?
Yes, I can.
What Brad was saying is that he's going to, once he stops talking, he's going to resend all of us the map. And he started to list some out, but I think he stopped because it's probably easier for him to just resend it to all of our laptops rather than kind of going through the whole list.
Okay.
And he's just starting now to address the percentage issue again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I apologize.
Delegate Long, to the percentage question, the percentage of units that are affordable has nothing to do with how densely the area is lived, right? The numbers are all tied to the area median income. Those are done by metropolitan statistical area. So you see some same among the different jurisdictions. We would recommend that this not be increased in any circumstance, that it be 25% or even 20%.
That's helpful. Thank you so much, Brad.
Thank you. And I'll resend that right.
Thank you, Brad, and thank you, Delegate Long. Yeah, and I mean, just the point on this, especially with these types of campuses, it's a finite number, and these are not going to be like the top targets of developers to look for normally, because they're not necessarily transit adjacent. We want them to be redeveloped because they're on these lands that are oftentimes sort of have like adequate infrastructure already because they at one point were populated by students or patients or what have you. But they're not necessarily at the top of folks' list. In some ways, it can be a lot cheaper to like look for like a greenfield development and sort of start from scratch in like a sprawl universe rather than look to some of these campuses and try to convert old uses, because a lot of times there's so much kind of mitigation efforts that have to be done in these old structures. So I think the idea here is to lower the percentage enough so that these projects actually pencil out and we can actually get redevelopment at these sites. Delegate Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate your patience, Brad. I'm trying to wrap my mind around affordable housing. I think you answered my question that it's attached to the AMI. Is that the definition of affordable housing?
That's right. And I'm happy to walk through how that calculation works.
Okay. And I can imagine that the AMI today is going to be different from the AMI in 10 years and 20 and 30. So how do we adjust for that?
It's assessed annually. So DHCD already, through pre-existing programs, uses really HUD data, and they produce that and publish it on an annual basis.
That's great. What is it today? Because we've been talking about concentrations of poverty. What would it be today?
So it is by county, and I will resend that as well. Let me add this.
Okay.
This has all gone out on like a masterpiece that you guys received a bit ago. We broke it down by county because it's different in each state. And it's different by size of the household. And so if it is one household, one person in the household, two person in the household, 3 up to 5 different people in the household, it's all at a different rate, of course, kind of a higher income level given the household size.
So are we really fearful of concentrations of poverty? I mean, are these, I don't think that they're lower income people. More workforce. No?
I think that's
I'm
right.
not-
I think that would be fair to say. Yeah, sorry, Brad. I think that would be fair to say, Delegate Davis. I mean, I don't personally have concentration of poverty concern, but this bill is ultimately the product that the House eventually, maybe, hopefully passes, is going to be something that a bunch of different stakeholders touched. And some people do have those concerns. I don't personally have the concerns because once Brad sends over the AMI figures, you'll see that 60% of AMI in Montgomery County, I think, is something like $80,000, depending on the family size. So we're not necessarily talking about impoverished people when you're talking about 60% of AMI. But at the same time, you know, we've got colleagues across the street who I think especially have raised this as a concern. And so, you know, this is ultimately going to be a consensus product. But to your point, yeah, absolutely. We're not talking about people high levels of high poverty. And if you look back on page 5, and in fact, if I can get my staff to just scroll back to page 5 to answer your question, you just read the definition of affordable and affordable dwelling unit and area median income. Those definitions are all in a row. And reading them together, you can see what we mean by affordable. So affordable, number one, means that housing costs don't exceed 30% of a household's income. And then what is the income? Then you go down to affordable dwelling unit, and that means that a unit that is supported by households earning 60% or less. So basically, you're not paying more than 30% of an income that's 60% of the AMI. And we have two main areas in Maryland. One is like the Baltimore area, which is a lower AMI, and then one is the Washington Metro. But there are other smaller ones, including like Charles. So, but hopefully, yeah, hopefully we can get those numbers in our inboxes bumped up by Brad, but I know that he has sent that before. And it's an important question because it's easy to say 60% of that number or whatever, but it's helpful to actually know exactly which income ranges we're talking about. Okay, let's go back down to page 7. I think we finished with that state-owned campus type of qualified project. So we're going to move to page 8. This is the second type of qualified project. For lack of a better term, this is what I've been referring to as the transit adjacent part. So here you'll see we've made 2 big changes. We've again reduced the affordability levels from 25 to 15. Again, this was motivated by a concern that we weren't going to get enough new projects hitting a 25% affordability level. I will say anecdotally, in my county, there was a recent project near a metro station that had one of the highest affordability levels we've seen near metro in Montgomery County in recent years, and that was 30%. But the reason that was done is because it was done by our Housing Opportunities Commission. So it was a public-private partnership, and because we could use public bond dollars, they were able to get that high level of affordability. But that's a little bit of a unicorn. Like 30 is tough to pull off. 25 is also tough. That's why we did 15. The other number that I would keep in mind is that in Montgomery County, every new development in Montgomery County, this is called the MPDU program, has to hit either 12.5% or 15%, depending on how close you are to transit. So that's what we were thinking here. We know that we have a precedent in my home county for developers being able to provide 15% affordability levels near transit. The other thing we did here is we, subject to a feedback from a lot of different groups, we brought down the radius of what is transit adjacent from 1 mile around a rail station and half a mile. Delegate Naraki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it. So I have 2 concerns with this part of the bill. So the rail station that would qualify in my district, much of the land in this area is, which is in Baltimore County zoned rural conservation. I know different counties have different designations, meaning that there is no public water or sewer in this area. So the way I read this, there's no guardrails for that. And we have been struggling, as you all know, with Back River and all these other kinds of things to clean that up in this part of Baltimore County. This would be very problematic for the Bay without some sort of guardrails there for projects to have public water and sewer hookups when you're talking about high density projects like this.
Okay, got it. I appreciate that comment, Delegate Naraki.
And then, Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yeah, please do. Follow up with your second one. Yeah.
So my second one, and Mr. Chair, I'm not sure if you took a look at it, but I submitted an amendment. I have a very, very, very unique circumstance in my district. I have the only spot in the entire Northeast where there is a heavy rail station. The MTA is well aware of it, others, where we have passengers crossing the train tracks to get onto the train. You know, so we're not just talking about the light rail that's moving at 15, 20 miles per hour. We're talking about the Acela train moving at 150 miles per hour. I have serious concerns without resolving that train station there of loading that up with a high density project there, where, you know, I don't think anybody wants to be out there. I don't think, certainly I know the governor doesn't want to be out there when someone gets hit by a train going 150 miles per hour. So I would again urge consideration of that amendment there here. It doesn't say that area could never qualify. It just says we got to correct that problem at that train station.
Got it. So yeah, to summarize, first, Delegate Naraki is concerned about in his district, it's basically some of these areas that are adjacent to transit might not be zoned residential and may also just not be suitable in terms of infrastructure capacity for new dense housing. And then secondly, he has a concern about the way the rail stations are lined up, forcing passengers to just literally step over the tracks in a way that is potentially unsafe. And his amendment, which we did see, essentially would delay the application of the density provisions of this particular section around transit until MTA is able to correct this issue, which I understand is a substantial expense. And Delegate Naraki, correct me if I'm wrong, but they're working on it, but it's expensive. And they want to do it eventually, but there's no timetable right now. Is that right?
That's exactly right. We, in fact, had a project that I believe, Mr. Chair, would have resolved. There was a transit-oriented development project that was going to occur in this area. Unfortunately, COVID sort of killed that project. Would have, I believe, resolved this issue. Again, my amendment, though, is really only focused on that station. It does not derail, no pun intended there, the entire scope of what this section of the bill is looking to do. It's just saying we got to fix that station there.
Okay. Great. Thank you, Delegate Naraki. I guess I'll turn again to Brad and/or Haley to get comments on both Delegate Naraki's proposed amendment, and maybe you are more familiar with that particular station than I am. And then secondly, his broader thoughts about sort of the applicability of zoning in areas that he doesn't think comport well with the requirements of the bill.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Mr. Chair, again for throwing it to us. And thanks, Delegate Naraki. On the first point on where you're building, there is already exemptions in the bill that says unless state law does not allow you to build there, but we did specifically call out conservation zones and agricultural zones as not applicable to this section at all. So I hope that completely addresses your concern, because it is explicit in the bill that it doesn't apply. For the water lines and the sewage lines, that's also captured in the bill, is that local jurisdictions can apply adequate public facility ordinances, impact fees, whatever requirements that they put on this to require folks to build those out, right? They can also, in circumstances, just deny based off of an APO if the project is incapable of hooking up into public water or sewer. It's kind of a chicken and egg issue where unless you have financing coming in to hook up to the public utilities or expand them, then you really never get them. And if you wait for that to happen for housing, then you end up in this endless cycle of getting neither infrastructure improvements nor housing. But in this section, you can make that a requirement on the developer to finance themselves. Most likely, that would be the same case for the MTA issue that you just raised, where you have lines running through. Maybe you had mentioned that the TOD project was going to resolve that and it fell through. That's, again, often what happens here. Infrastructure projects are needed. They're very expensive. Development wants to come in. A local jurisdictions may say, okay, you can develop if you take care of this issue. And then if they have the financing in, they will roll that in. So I actually see this bill as potentially a solution to the concerns that you've raised there, Delegate Naraki.
Thanks, Brad. And also there are different like TIFs and different financing schemes too, where counties, I think, are usually empowered, and this wouldn't change under the bill, to dedicate revenue from like adjacent development projects to infrastructure improvements in that area. Is that right, Brad?
That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right.
So it's possible that maybe if this was successful in the stop that Delegate Naraki was talking about, that maybe, you know, they could pump, you know, maybe even close to 100% of the new revenue into this kind of project and try to get this fixed in a more expedited way than the current timetable suggests. Does that sound right to everybody? Okay. All right, Delegate Naraki, are you good there? For now, at least.
I'm good, Mr. Chair. Maybe we can have some further conversations offline.
Yeah, I think maybe we pass the bill with Delegate Naraki's support, and then we rename the new crossing over the track after him. I'll be there for the ribbon cutting.
Mr. Chair, this might be the one that Chair Corbin gets me to be the floor leader on here. Who knows?
There we go. Okay. All right. Well, let's continue going down. Appreciate everyone's input and patience here with us. So that's the transit part. We're going to roll down here to the third type of qualified project. We're almost to the end of the bill. This is, for the lack of a better term, what I've been calling the nonprofit piece. So basically what we're saying here is that if you're a bona fide nonprofit organization under federal IRS law, then you also get the goodies. You can also be a qualified project and get the goodies of expedited review and density bonuses under the bill, but with some strings attached. The one thing you will see that we added around line 6 is this definition of controlled by. And then you will see later on that we are adding in basically that we want the nonprofit to be, we want the project to be controlled by a 501c3. And the concern here that we heard from people, including some members of the subcommittee that I talked to, was, can this be exploited? Can clever lawyers dress up an otherwise for-profit project as a nonprofit project in order to benefit from the bill? And if so, you know, what can we do about that? So that's where we tried to put in this language here around, first of all, the controlled by language. And then if you look at line 18, this new amendment we added here is that you have to be a 501c3 for at least 3 years. And we're hoping that helps to prevent clever attorneys from just sort of doing like a pop-up nonprofit in order to build a project. We're making there be basically like a more long-standing nonprofit that's existed for at least 3 years. Even though I see no hands, I do want to kick it back over to Brad if I could, just to talk about this IRS piece. And if there, you could say anything to allay concerns of subcommittee members about clever lawyers, not me included, but cleverer lawyers than me, that could try to exploit the provisions here in the 501c3 section.
Yeah, absolutely. So the concern was raised, and we checked in with all sorts of folks on this. Keenly, the Maryland Association of CPAs and a number of tax attorneys that we work with. I have a memo coming today. I had a long conversation with the Association of CPAs last night where they said, look, there is no way that somebody is going to be able to set this up to match behind it, because all of the scrutiny tests that are applied to 501c3s by the IRS. Just to be extra careful, we did endorse the controlled by language, which was submitted by NACO, and also this 3-year language here. The CPAs actually cautioned a bit against the 3 years language because sometimes nonprofits have to be established with a particular purpose. And say if a religious institution wanted to set it up, it would then need to wait for 3 years. But their bottom line was the structure here with the controlled by language is strong enough that they don't have concerns and see any loopholes that can be exploited. And there was very lengthy tax lawyer conversations on that, but happy to answer any questions.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, and this is a good reminder for folks that this section of the bill is somewhat similar to a bill that I proposed for the last couple of years, meant to, especially now that I see Delegate Long's hand, I'm maybe anticipating what he may ask about here, which is intended to, for, you know, houses of worship, give them a little bit of kind of some goodies under the bill if they want to use some of their land for housing, because this is increasingly something that houses of worship are interested in doing for a variety of reasons, including faith-based reasons and very financial and secular-based reasons as well. Delegate Long.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I wanted to offer this as a point of conversation. And again, this becomes more of a federal issue, I believe, and I'm not a tax attorney or a lawyer. But generally speaking, houses of worship are automatically considered 501c3 without having to apply. and churches are not, even required to submit a voluntary form at the end of the tax recording year, indicating what they've brought in. Some do so just on their own volition. So I'd be curious to know, would that be confusing for the houses of worship? And I think that's something that we should check with. Again, I don't want to hold anything up, but I think
yeah.
that is a point that is always debated back and forth, even as related to when federal aid came down from the federal government for PPP or EIDL. They wanted them to have tax returns in various forms, but churches are automatically considered a 501c3. And so that is my question. Would that become more of a barrier for houses of worship?
Yeah, thank you for raising. This is really important. This is actually something that I've had to grapple with because I had that other bill and trying to figure out exactly what the right definitions were. That's, I think, a really important issue to raise. Brad, do you have any response on that?
Yeah, we engaged on that exact point, Delegate Long, so I appreciate you raising it. That the short answer is no, that it's not a concern. We made sure that with these amendments here, they'd be captured. I tracked down, in the wonderful world we have here, a tax attorney who specializes on 501c3s doing this sort of work. And what he told me was that in every house of worship he has ever worked with that's done housing, they've actually set up a separate 501c3 as a subsidiary to run the project through. So that was the only case actually where he said the 3-year piece may just push them back a little bit, but they would retain the option to set this up on their own books because they have that 501c3 status.
Got it. If I could just have one more bite of the apple, and I think that's amazing. And I do believe that addresses my concerns. I only raise this for churches, and again, that are in rural areas or other components who may not always be as savvy to set up a separate CDC or 501c3 and to work in that realm, especially because the fact is it's not required that they are doing that they have to go establish a 501c3. So would that small group, that small subset of houses of worship, again, sometimes have a lot of land, members will bequeath land to churches and et cetera, are they captured in any kind of way as well for those who don't set up a separate 501c3?
Yeah, Brad. Thank you, Delegate Long. No, this is a really important issue. Brad, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, the short answer is yes. Because they are 501c3 in status, they're absolutely captured under this section.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. And I'll also make this offer, Delegate Long. I mean, if you want to touch base with Brad offline or any other sort of pastors that you know or any of the experts he's talked to offline, even if we do vote this out today, we're not going to take this up in full committee until Thursday afternoon. So if that's something that, you talk to them offline or still not satisfied with is that section, happy to entertain, a friendly full committee amendment to sort of clean that up if necessary.
Will do. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Delegate Naraki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question, because I am nowhere near as familiar with 501c3s as others might be here. What is the reporting requirements for those organizations in terms of who's behind it? Where I'm going with that, Mr. Chair, is a lot of discussions that we've had about mobile home parks and things like that, where you get these actors that sometimes can be very difficult to track down. I just from my knowledge, what does that look like in terms of knowing, who's behind an organization?
Yeah. My understanding is that the IRS is way stricter on 501c3 filings than the State Department of Commerce or Labor would be about LLC filings, which is, I know, what we've discussed. A lot of times what you'll see is it'll be a race to the bottom for LLC filings, whereas we've talked about certain states will have extremely bare bones requirements, and then you'll have these out-of-state LLCs that open up either mobile home parks or some other business in Maryland, and we have a hard time controlling them because they're only subject to these kind of requirements for some state in the Mountain West, not to pick on the Mountain West or something like that. This, though, is a one federal standard that I think is very stringent because the IRS doesn't like to lose money by fraudulent filings. So I think this is, it would probably be hard to find a more stringent reporting requirement than a 501c3. And if we do end up taking sort of a Delegate Long amendment, that may be a discussion that we can have before Thursday too, to make sure that if we do somehow make it easier on churches, we don't want to unintentionally create a situation where someone could kind of pretend to be a church, or a house of worship and then not have to file 501c3 filings and then somehow subvert this.
Right. Okay, perfect. That's, you
Okay.
know exactly where I was going with that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, totally. Delegate Lehman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I missed this discussion, I do apologize. But where is or how is a substantial renovation defined in this bill? Did we talk about that? And what is this?
Yeah, we talked about that briefly, and that's actually one of the changes you'll see in the reprint. So if you can go back, if my folks can scroll back up to the top of page 7 of the reprint, this is in lines 3 and 4. This is an amendment that we had to sort of clarify what we mean by a substantial renovation. And my understanding is that basically, like in this financing program guide, DHCD actually keeps like a directory of these, is my kind of like lay understanding. Brad, do you want to sort of talk through this amendment here that we're adding and the clarity it provides on what's a substantial renovation? I do think substantial renovation is like a term. It's like a term of art that has been clarified in case law, but I think we wanted to kind of clean it up a little bit more with this amendment. Brad, any thoughts, or how wrong was I there?
I think you were exactly right. If there's more questions about the methodology, I would throw it over to Haley Lemieux to speak to how the
Yeah, Haley.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, you were exactly right.
Yeah, so usually, because I tried to deal with this in my in one of my bills, and there was a lot of discussion and debate and disagreement, frankly, about it in the development and the building industry and even labor circles. And there was no clear standard already in the law, but typically what people were thinking of is a percentage value of the cost of the renovation versus the market rate, the value of the property, the replacement cost of the property. So like HUD uses a standard that's 15%, where if the total project cost for whatever the renovation is, whether you're replacing an HVAC system, whether you're doing other kinds of remodeling, redoing a kitchen or bathroom, that if it equals 15% of the replacement cost of the marketplace, value of the replacement cost of the building, then that is a substantial renovation. Unless that's in here and I'm not seeing it, I don't understand what the definition is.
Yeah, let's let Haley have an opportunity. I think she started to maybe explain this. Haley, you want to take a crack at that?
Yeah, absolutely, Mr. Chair and Delegate Lehman. So the department includes a definition that mirrors IRS standards for this, for a property to be able to receive low-income housing tax credits as a substantial renovation project. So it does change annually based on the IRS standards. It's a set clear threshold. And so the amendment clarifies the eligibility for a substantial renovation. So anything that the department would fund as a renovation would be eligible.
So where does it say that is what I'm asking? Does it actually spell that out, or am I looking right at it? I don't see it.
That's my interpretation here on the shared screen of line 4, that basically substantial renovation is modified by this new phrase in the reprint as annually established and identified by the Department of Housing and Community Development and the Multifamily Rental Financing Program Guide. That's what Haley is saying.
Okay, if I could have a further conversation offline with Haley or Brad and see what this looks like in writing, that would be helpful to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, that's it.
I'm sure they'd be happy to connect you. And again, same offer to you as Delegate Long. If that's something we need to clean up to make you feel totally comfortable with, that's also a full committee amendment that we could do on Thursday.
Okay, yeah, I might take you up on that, but I'd like to talk to them further and not hold up the meeting.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Lehman. Delegate Long.
Mr. Chair, I'm not sure this is appropriate. If I am out of order, please just let me know. I'm just new to this. So if we want to move it and we can just address these concerns in full committee, let me know.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. I would like to just go ahead, and we're almost done with the reprint. We'll see if there's appetite to go ahead and make a motion here at the end, but I do want to make sure that we make it all the way through the bill before we do so. But you're in no way out of line, Delegate Long. I appreciate that. So I think we've concluded with page 9. We can continue to page 10. This is the section here at the bottom of page 10 that I referenced earlier. This is just like the finishing part of the nonprofit section. And then talking about the density bonuses again. And then here on page 10, this is the unreasonable limitation. Basically any type of bill. I mean, obviously this is not this bill in its core concepts is not unique. A number of other different states, including, Montana, Oregon, Washington, et cetera, have done similar bills. And this section here in 7505 is just kind of the always included provision here to basically say that local jurisdictions can't try to be cute or cheeky and use height setbacks, parking requirements, et cetera, to try to frustrate the implementation of the bill. So that's all that's saying. This next section, 7506, going on to page 11, this is the expedited portion that I keep mentioning, how, the goodies that basically the qualified projects get not only are density bonuses of 30%, but they're also this expedited review component. So you can see here that we did take amendments from, I think it was Mako, someone can correct me if I'm wrong, to increase this to basically say that the projects that are qualified projects can't have, instead of having more than one hearing before each of these 4 different entities, saying more than 2, which means that the maximum amount of public hearings that would be available for a qualified project under the bill now, under this amendment, is 8. 4 times 2. Now, I don't think that actually they would all get 8 public hearings, because I don't think that, depending on the local jurisdiction, you don't have to go through all 4 of these different entities every single time you have a qualified project. But the maximum would be 8, and the minimum presumably would be 2, if you only have to go through one of these entities. Delegate Naraki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just jumping back a page or two here.
Sorry.
No, there's a lot going on here. Right there. The section that we're talking about requirements there, I'm particularly interested about height. So again, the area in my district that would most qualify is also near an airport, near Martin State Airport, which we've been fighting very hard to keep the Air National Guard flying wing there. So I just want to make sure, I want to understand what reasonableness means with respect to height. Wouldn't want us to see us put up a high rise that somehow would limit our ability to have an air wing there. So I just, want to understand what is considered reasonable in that case, or I guess maybe unreasonable.
I appreciate that. And we did mention, like, we do have a more built out definition of unreasonable limitation or requirement on line 20 of page 6.
Okay.
So you want to scroll back up and you can see that it's spelled out a little bit more. I would personally argue, as a mediocre attorney, that I think limiting height based on planes flying overhead would be like the absolute textbook example of reasonable. I think I can't imagine a more reasonable limitation than that personally, but happy to kick it over to anyone else if they think that I'm wrong about that. Or if I didn't add anything I should have. Brad? Ben?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just on that section, because there may be some other questions about it. Our Chair Stewart here was kind enough to ask the Assistant Attorney General's office how this would be applied. And what they came back in very certain terms, and we're happy to put this into the record, is that unreasonable means that it has no rational basis and is only there to kill the project from moving forward at all. That's a low bar, I think. And it's also a high bar of proof that that's what they're doing. So in the scenario that you're mentioning, Delegate, that would not apply. They would, of course, be able to put restrictions on the height.
Perfect. Thank you, Brad. I appreciate you putting that on the record there. Thank you.
Yeah, it's sort of like a bad faith restriction is like how I would characterize it. It's like something where you're just doing it because you don't like the bill,
Sure.
Not because you actually have some sort of other reason. But that's very helpful, and I appreciate that question. Okay, we can keep rolling. We'll go back to page 11, I think. This is back to the public meeting thing. So again, I think if you're a qualified project, basically, if you only have to go through one of these commissions, depending on what jurisdiction you're in, you would basically max out at 2 public hearings under this amendment. But if you had to go through all 4, which probably is pretty rare, I would imagine, but maybe possible, you'd have a maximum of 8. So the idea here is that we want to balance concerns about democracy and public input with concerns about how fast these projects can go forward, because we're only talking about a limited universe of projects, and they have all this affordability that we like. They're located in places, or they're being done by people we like. And so we want to make sure there's some sort of expeditious review so that costs don't start piling up pursuant to the efficiency of the project. All right, we can keep scrolling here. This is actually the section that we referenced earlier in relation to Delegate Naraki's concerns. So here you can see in 7508 that the density basically of these projects doesn't apply if we're talking about agricultural or conservation property. So that's what Brad mentioned earlier. So we finally got to that section. Okay, we'll keep it rolling on page 12. This is mostly just sort of technical stuff here. This is some public utility language that I believe the chair wanted, if I remember that correctly. Ben, is that right?
That's correct, Mr. Chair. And this provision is about anticipating increases in duplexes and problems that could arise by not having clear metering.
That's right. That's right. So this was not in the original bill, but it was raised by Chair Corman about master meters and how duplexes could sort of make master meters, which are already a very complicated issue, even more complicated. So that's meant to address that. We can keep rolling. We're in the final section here on 13, page 13. This is the, for lack of a better term, the APFO section. So adequate public facility ordinances, as y'all probably know, are local ordinances that allow local jurisdictions to prevent new housing on the grounds of lack of infrastructure. This provision in the bill generated, I think, a fair amount of controversy at the hearing. And I think also is probably the number one concern that's been raised to me by either members of the subcommittee or members of the broader full committee. And so the big amendment here that we're adding on starting on line 8 is actually from Michelle Guyton, Delegate Michelle Guyton. We've been referring to it as the Guyton Amendment, actually. And it has to do with this issue of school capacity. So this last APFO section, it's important to raise, is not really overlapping super robustly with the qualified project section that we just meticulously went through. This is really kind of a separate sphere here. And what it says is that if a project gets state or federal funding, namely from LIHTC or from one of DHCD's financing programs, then basically local jurisdictions still have some say over the project. Obviously, they're not relinquishing all their autonomy or control, but they can't use APFO to just straight up deny the permit or unreasonably restrict it. There were a lot of concerns about this provision as it related to schools. A lot of people came to me and said, including Delegate Guyton, and said, well, this is going to force us to basically eat these new units in areas where we have overcrowded schools. And we have kids in trailers going to schools and they're unsafe and we're way over capacity to begin with. And APFO is a tool in the toolbox that we want to be able to use to deny housing, not because we don't want new housing, not because we don't like poor people or whatever, but just because our schools are, coming apart at the seams, maximally full. And it's going to take us years and years to get enough capital to build new schools. It's a long and arduous process. So we put this provision in here that basically says that this provision of the bill, this APFO provision, does not apply for a school district, an attendance area, like a cluster, that is over capacity. It's over 100% capacity. So if you've got a school where you don't actually have any more space, under this amendment, you could use APFO to deny a state-funded or a federal-funded project. Delegate Long.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, I don't mean to ask so many questions. I really support the intent. I'm concerned about the amendment. I respect my colleague highly, only for this, and I lifted this up during the actual hearing for the bill. And take a page out of our former chair, Kumar Barve. He would always say that many of these individuals are not new to the community. They're already in our communities. They've been staying on a friend's couch, or perhaps they've been living with families. So I just want to know, what if a school board, a particular district just tends to oppose any kind of policy such as this? What guardrails are in place to ensure that they're not just claiming 100% capacity?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point, and it's something I'm sensitive to as well, because we want people to be acting in good faith, and we don't want local jurisdictions to basically just try to exploit APFO provisions to deny housing and just sort of claim that they're under the school exemption. And I get that. I mean, I think in terms of guardrails, I mean, I think DHCD in the state would have jurisdiction to call out or enjoin local jurisdictions who were fudging the numbers. You know, like if they actually were at, you know, 80% capacity in a certain school, usually those numbers are public. They report them to MSDE. They're sort of, you know, available on a website of each school capacity. And I think if they were lying about that, it would be pretty easy to catch. But I'm happy to kick that over to Brad or Haley if they want to talk about that specific question or just kind of this APFO provision more broad or this APFO provision more broadly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Is that this had a broader implications, right? This is a power that's already given to the Board of Education. It's in reference there in 4109 C of the education article. So there would be broader repercussions to trying to fudge those numbers than just applicability to this. This would be the least of their problems. Is the applicability here. To the point about students already living in that area, I don't disagree. It's right. I think that what we can't confidently say is that with new developments here, will more students not move into the area? And like I brought up earlier, these often lead to financing options for all sorts of infrastructure. It's easy for a developer to build, you know, a new road or a new water line. They can't build a whole new school. And so that's probably the one section of the APFO that does make sense to have an exception based off some of the attendance rate in our view. So we fully support the amendment.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brad. Thanks, Delegate Long. Delegate Naraki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is more just a clarifying question about the language here. So, you know, I have areas in my district where the elementary school might be at 100% capacity or higher. The middle school, though, might be at 90%, and then the high school. Many of our high schools are at 115 and more. Is it just any school kind of at any level that's at 100% or more? Or I just want to understand kind of how that works, the mechanics of that.
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. This is something I thought through as well. My reading of this section is that if any school, if basically the project is proposed for the catchment area of, as this says, the attendance area of any public school that is over capacity, whether it's elementary, middle, or high, APFO could be APFO could still be used to deny the permit. That's my reading of it, but happy if anyone thinks I'm wrong. Yeah, Brad, am I wrong?
No, I wouldn't try and come off camera. No, you're absolutely right.
Okay. Okay, thanks. Thanks. Delegate Davis.
Yeah, now the former county leaders get to weigh in. So the way that school funding is set up is that you have to be over 100%. So we're all 100% of capacity. So we're all functioning over 100% so we can get the state school funding. So I'm wondering how that fits in. I'm just offering that for the discussion because how does that fit in?
It's a very good point, Delegate Davis. And of course, I'm sure we all, as well as your former constituents in Charles County, appreciate your service on the county commission. And you're right, a ton of schools, either because it takes so long to build a new school or because you can get some additional funding. A lot of schools, including I think probably every school in my neighborhood that my kids will eventually go to, are over 100% capacity. In fact, in Montgomery County, it's very rare to have anyone under 100. And in fact, it's considered pretty good if you're only like 115%, for example. And I think that's totally a fair point. And again, back to the point I made earlier last time you spoke, is this bill is going to be a compromise product. And Delegate Guyton felt strongly that she did not want to cause any more capacity issues in her district by having this new housing. And so that's why we put this in the reprint. But I totally get the concern that, this is a pretty big exemption because we're not talking about a universe of schools that's very large when you're talking about ones under 100%. And at the same time, it's like I guess I would say we don't necessarily need to make the perfect the enemy of the good. And so that's anytime you have a big bill like this that's gone through as much stakeholder input as this one has, not every provision is going to be perfect to everyone. And I share your concerns about that. But at the same time, I think there are a chorus of people who are very concerned. So that's the best I can do. Yeah, Delegate Davis.
I'd just like to follow up. Can we talk about these sites and how many jurisdictions would
That's a good
this
point.
would apply
Yeah.
to based on that?
Yeah, that's a good point. Brad or Haley, I would be shocked if they had off the top of their head
I
the
get it.
number of different areas that where, or examples, I guess, of recently federally or DHCD funded sites that were in neighborhoods with all schools, elementary, middle, and high school, under 100%. I know that you guys don't have that available, but if you do, great. If you don't, maybe we could share that with Delegate Davis at some point before Thursday, because it is an important issue.
Yeah, we don't
Chair
have it.
Stewart, what we do have is we have excellent records from the Maryland Department of Planning on instances where APFOs have been used to deny housing projects based on school capacity. So typically this happens in only a handful of counties, and we'd be happy to provide that information to the committee before Thursday.
Thank you.
I guess, yeah, thank you, Delegate. And I guess another way to phrase this, Haley, is, you guys are in support of the amendment. You'd probably like the bill better without the amendment, but you feel like this provision of the bill is still doing enough work based on your experience with APFO being used that you can still feel good about this section. Would that be fair to say? Okay.
That's fair, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Delegate Lehman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just like to point out, now things have changed somewhat since I left the Prince George's County Council. And, we have parts of the county that are very overcrowded, but we have other parts that are under-enrolled. And so I think the thing to keep in mind is that in Prince George's, we call that office Pupil Accounting and School Boundaries, and they change those boundaries once a year. So they're pretty, about as flexible and fleet of foot as you're going to get within a large bureaucracy at changing those boundary lines to relieve overcrowding. So that would be one way of responding and being able, as long as you're not working with a site that's kind of in the middle of nowhere and you wouldn't be, imposing like an undue burden on kids to endure a much longer bus ride to a school a lot further away that's under enrolled. I think that there's sort of a way to work with that. But my second comment, I'm just going to put this out there. Delegate Guyton probably wouldn't be happy, and maybe some others. I think the wording of that amendment is way too narrow. I think you're going to end up with not being able to build at all. I really think that's going to be problematic. When you're talking about one single year, their populations, you can have a shift, in 1 year where, because say other new development came online where, only the elementary school I guess Jeff Long or Deborah Davis, whoever asked, or Ryan Nowacki's point, the elementary is way overcrowded, but the middle school is under-enrolled. And the high school is right at capacity. I think if you're talking about any one of those, scenarios in, K-5, 6-8, 9-12, being, where two of them are at, 95% capacity and one's at like 101%, you've just, for 1 year, then you've just precluded the possibility of building in that area. I think this is going to be problematic for the opposite reason. That's just my observation.
Yeah, Delegate Lehman, I think that's a very, very thoughtful and hopefully not prescient, comment. But hopefully you're wrong. But I think it's a really good point. I think, unfortunately, for people that are holding that view, I think they're like I said, as a chorus of voices on the other side that feel very, very uncomfortable with the idea that this bill could generate overcapacity concerns. Now, what I will say in response to that, Delegate Lehman, is we do come back every year, and so I think that could be, we will see, as with this entire bill, we will be able to monitor its progress and see if it's having the intended effect that we wanted. And I'm confident that Brad and Haley and Chuck and all their friends from DHCD will be the first people to tell us if this section is being exploited against our intent such that basically this provision was read out of law because everyone's been able to claim APFO basically here. I don't know if that makes you feel any better, but I think that's where we're at. We got to, for those that care about the bill as a whole, like I do, we got to get something over the finish line here, but that doesn't at all preclude future efforts to try to plug holes.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks. Delegate Long.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, I just want to echo what our colleague Delegate Langman and Delegate Davis have said. I think that is problematic only because I think that, like myself, Delegate Langman, we both represent 2 counties. And so I'm able to see it from 2 different angles of vantage points. A lot of our schools right now that we have in our jurisdiction are already labeled to be at capacity. But these students have to go somewhere and be educated somewhere. And I just hope that that would not be an inhibiting factor to the intent and the purpose of the bill. And I can see that in certain jurisdictions that I represent as well too, being nothing more than a loophole, which will cause unwanted consequences in the future.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate this entire thing. And at the risk of adding even more complexity here, I mean, I think a lot of school districts would love to have these projects, even if they are slightly over capacity, or at least they should, because especially in areas that are not necessarily as affluent, a project, as Delegate Davis referenced earlier, that is 20% affordable for those making 60% AMI for a lot of more sort of low income, high poverty, high free or reduced lunch schools, they would love to get the economic diversity, the socioeconomic diversity that one of these projects might entail for those students, because we all know that every study suggests that poor kids and rich kids do better when you have economic diversity. And when you have concentration of poverty in schools, it's not good for anybody. So it's another point to keep in mind, but I totally hear the concerns. Okay, so we've finished the entirety of the bill. I really appreciate all of y'all's patience and work on this. Before I entertain any motions, I just want to, I obviously gave a lot of special attention to Brad and Haley. We have a number of other advocates on the call. So I would ask them now if they wanted to weigh in before we take any motions. I don't want obviously this to go all day. So if anyone has any very brief thoughts, I'm happy to entertain those. But if not, I would also totally accept that as well. It looks like Dom is coming off camera. But Dom, before I call on you, let me just go ahead and get Delegate Foley square away since she's a member of the subcommittee.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a procedural question, because I thought at the beginning of this, you said there was another amendment.
There is. There's one small amendment. I haven't forgotten, but we can take care of this first and maybe move this first, this huge reprint amendment. And then there's one tiny other add-on amendment that we'll take up in just a moment, assuming that vote goes well.
Okay. Is it your intention to vote this bill out today?
I am only a tool of the subcommittee. If you guys want to vote it out, I think we can. If you guys want to take it up tomorrow, we can do that as well. It's totally up to you guys. There's no, we've got time. We've already after crossover. There's not necessarily a particular rush, but at the same time, if y'all feel like you feel comfortable enough that if you do have future concerns, you could raise it at full committee when we would vote on this on Thursday. It's ultimately up to you. I'm not really pushing an agenda on that.
And just to follow up on that, so there were a couple of things that we talked about that you seem to understand and agree with that came up that we talked about possibly changing. Would we, how would we proceed with that if we were gonna? Because that would have to be.
We could do full committee. Yeah, I mean, like I said before, we could do on these like remaining issues that I hope that we can all follow up on. We'll have 48 hours to get Ben to draft up some full committee amendments on that. So I'm not so much worried about that. If the intent was to move forward today, I think we could pull it off. But if the comfort level was more on waiting a day, also totally fine with me.
Okay, thank you.
Delegate Naraki.
Mr. Chair, I would prefer, I'm going to ask if we could hold it for one day. There's a lot going on here. And I think, I'd also like to confer with some of our other committee. I know they're not on the subcommittee, but our other committee members, there's just a lot going on with these amendments. And I'd like to have a little bit of time to kind of digest all this that's going on here.
Totally. Okay. Well, I'm happy to accept that hold. So we'll plan not to vote, but we will just finish up with these last remaining comments since we've got folks here. Mr. Butchko, I'm sorry to cut you off briefly here. If you had any thoughts, knowing we're not going to vote today anyway, and you'll probably be back tomorrow, but any thoughts?
I just had one question, and I apologize if this was brought up, but for clarity around the density bonuses, and so I want to thank the governor's office and DHCD. They've been great to work with. My understanding is that the density bonuses is that it's multiple paths to one density bonus instead of the potential to get 3. That was supposed to be cleared up in amendments. Mr. Chair, I didn't hear that brought up at all, so I just wanted to clarify if that was corrected.
Yeah, thank you for raising that. I actually did sort of blow through that. And the concern here is, we don't want necessarily the intent, I think, of the governor was not to make these density bonuses so, stackable. And Ben, do you have an update on either that amendment or what we ended up doing with that concern?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So yeah, we received that testimony. We worked with DHCD, and an example of that prohibition on stacking, so to speak, is on the screen right now. As we talked about, there were 3 paths for the density bonuses, but the goal was for them not to be on top of one another. So you see there in paragraph 6, where it's saying that if a qualified project is exceeding density under this section, that same project cannot also exceed authorized density under the 7503 or 7504 of the bill. And that's a way to limit it to just one of the paths.
There we go. Yeah, I was forgetting where that was, but I appreciate that very much, Ben. And I think that addresses, the stackability thing. Basically, if you're a nonprofit and it's a state-owned campus near transit, you're not getting 3 density bonuses, you just get 1. And that's what that section is meant to make clear. Okay, with that, seeing no further hands and knowing that y'all have been very patient, we've had, probably the longest meeting in this subcommittee's history already. We are going to honor Delegate Naraki's hold, and we are going to come back same time, roughly, definitely same place, Zoom. And we're going to take this up tomorrow afternoon. And hopefully that gives some folks some more time to digest this reprint. I do want to very, very briefly before we adjourn, Ben, if you could just throw up that other amendment on the screen, because I don't want to leave folks hanging there.
Yep, 1 second.
Okay. This was a late breaking amendment that we were not able to get into the reprint. Basically what this does, I can explain it briefly while he puts it up, is we are going to exempt single family communities. This is what at least the amendment proposes to do. Exempt single family communities from just the transit portion of the bill if they were already an established single family zone community within half a mile of transit. So in other words, there are a few exclusively single family zone communities that are already in existence within half a mile of transit. What this amendment would do is exempt them from the provisions of the bill. In other words, you could not be a qualified project within half a mile if it was a single family zone neighborhood. And what this is meant to do is balance 2 concerns. On the one hand, it might not be super appropriate, and also it would be very jarring for large density housing to start being built with density bonuses and expedited development in single family zone neighborhoods, even if they are near transit. But at the same time, we don't want to encourage local jurisdictions to try to subvert the provisions of the bill by naming new areas as single family after the bill passes. So we are grandfathering in existing single family neighborhoods, but we're not allowing local jurisdictions in the future to just adopt new single family zoning as a way to try to sidestep the provisions of the bill. So that's the last amendment. So we can think about that for 24 hours. Delegate Long.
Mr. Chair, I'm curious, who's proffering that amendment?
I'm proffering it.
Okay.
I'm not sure actually who Mr. Hall is, but Mr. Hall has his hand up. And so in the interest of honoring everyone's ability to speak as we gave Mr. Butchko, Mr. Hall, please take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Richard Hall, and I am a Special Assistant to the Director of Prince George's County Planning.
Oh, great. Welcome.
And thank you. Thank you very much. And I've worked with several people on this bill, and one minor comment, I think, because I thought there was pretty broad agreement on it. I didn't see it in the reprint just now, is the effective date. So it's the bill's October 1. During the hearing and conversations with DHCD and other stakeholders over the last couple of months, I thought that there's pretty broad agreement on December 1 being the effective date. And as you can imagine, local governments will need to respond to this legislation if it's successful. And there's local legislative processes that local governments will need to go through. So I didn't see that in a reprint, and I thought there was broad acknowledgement, acceptance of that. So that's my comment. Thank you. I know you're trying to wrap
Thank you,
up.
Mr. Hall. No, yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. And my understanding also was that there was broad agreement on that. I think that probably was my fault not to flag that for Ben when he was drafting the reprint. So I'll take that L myself, and we'll put our heads together with our counterparts here for the next 24 hours. And if there is indeed that broad agreement that you, Richard, and I think both agree is there on that, happy to get the new reprint up and running with a pushback effective date. Cool. All right. Seeing no further hands, again, really appreciate all Ben's work on this. Appreciate all the stakeholders who submitted all the dozens of amendments that we've been pouring over to try to get this bill in a good posture, and really appreciate all the thoughtful feedback from members of the subcommittee. This was a great meeting. I know it was a little bit exhausting, but this is a big bill. It's an important issue, and we'll take it up tomorrow.